I'm going to make a reference to a previous Devil's Due issue. It's 10 feet away. 1 second. Walking away from my microphone. Opening my door. My cat meowing. Alright, I'm coming back. I got the comic in my hand. And I'm sitting down. And I'm putting my headphones on. And I'm back.
Live from the Talking Joe Studios.
The last issues from him, an arc called Dawn of the Red Shadows. Brandon Joe's era's ending, a finale with the Red Shadows.
Hey, it's me, Mark, being carried away by the rise of the Red Shadows. Welcome to Talking Joe, the best and longest running dedicated G.I. Joe comics podcast, presented by someone called Mark, who is on the south coast of England and talks to someone called Tim. If you are new to the show, you can find all of the details over at the website, which is called talkingjoe.co.uk. We are continuing today with our look at the Disavowed era of G.I. Joe with issue 43, The Dawn of the Red Shadows, part 2, or chapters 3 and 4, possibly, if depending on how you look at it, from Devil's Due in May 2005. This is the final issue from Brandon Joe's run on the main title. Now, without further ado, let me introduce my co-host joining me on this adventure. It is a real American Tim. It's Tim Finn.
Hello, Mark, and hello, listeners.
Greetings to all of you out there doing well on the Hong Kong chart again, I see. So greetings to all of our Hong Kong listeners. So, Tim, we're talking about issue 43. This issue is from Brandon Joe. Brandon Joe. On story, pencils, Tim Seeley and Emiliano Santalucia, the same team who did half and a half of the full issue last time. Inks, Corey Hampshire, colouring Brett R. Smith, lettering Steve Seeley, editor Mark Powers, associate editor Mike O'Sullivan, graphic design Mike Norton, production assistants Sean Dove, military consultation Andrew Swenson.
Let's have a look at the covers in the gallery.
Now, the cover is credited to Tim Seeley, Sean Parsons, and Brett Smith.
This cover has been teased in two different ways. So this is issue 43 we're talking about, but back in issue 40, the inside back cover had a 12 square grid of heads. We talked about it on that episode. It was black and white. It was a very warm gray tones, black and white, and in a slightly distressed block font in red, it says, "The war will end, one will die, the Red Shadows will rise." G.I. Joe, May 2005. And all 12 of these heads, this is the same background as we are seeing on the cover of 43. So top left we see Wraith, and top right we see Roadblock, right? As we saw in the black and white house ad back in issue 40. And then, I don't have it in front of me, but it's either issue 41 or 42, the foreground of this new cover with these three characters in the Red Shadows. That was a house ad also promoting this storyline. So what we're seeing here are the three main Red Shadows in their Red Shadows costumes, looking serious at us, and with them in the way of much of the background, and the logo type and the Devil's Due logo and some copy like 48-page conclusion. We end up only being able to make out on this cover in the background Lady J's head, sort of Wraith because his eye is peeking through, sort of Destro because his eye and a little bit of his collar are peeking through, and Roadblock because he's the only black G.I. Joe or Cobra character with a big handlebar mustache. So, when I looked at this cover in reading it for this episode, the character who in the background, who's top center, could sort of either be Snake Eyes or Firefly, because all you see is a little bit of the top of the head, a little bit of the bottom of the jaw, and then a little bit of shoulders, and it's just sort of dark gray. And it's definitely Snake Eyes, right? Because you can see a little bit of sword, I think. Anyway, so what I'm saying is I appreciate that since we don't get to see most of this background here, we did get to see it 3 months ago in the back of issue 40. And it's a good drawing. It's a little overcolored in that modern way. There are lots of highlights on the characters in the background and lots of highlights on the characters in the foreground. I think the two red coats are leather, but I want to throw this back to you, Mark, because as a final issue and as a cover for this big deal story that's taking up 2 double-sized issues, does this cover grab you? Does it ask a question? Does it promise you something? Are you worried? Are you satisfied in its sort of like cool pose, character standing there looking cool? How do you take this cover?
I don't know. It's fine. I mean, they're the big characters, and I guess if they're the major characters, they deserve a cover, but they're standing there and they're cool and they're well drawn, but it's not especially exciting, is it?
It doesn't have tension. Sort of the closest comparison is G.I. Joe 155, A Real American Hero 155. And that cover, it's not all that well drawn, but it has a tone, it has mood, right? It is somber. And this cover, because of all of the cropping, this sort of ends up being inadvertent. Because of all the cropping, sort of the only background character who very clearly peeks through is Lady J. And so the cover accidentally becomes about 4 characters who are of equal importance. The 3 Red Shadows and Lady J, who, when you open this book, just died 1 page ago at the end of the previous issue. And that's interesting as a design choice, right? Because Roadblock gets knocked out, Snake Eyes gets knocked out, Wraith gets mostly knocked out. It's Major Blood behind Artur. No, I'm sorry, it's Cobra Commander. I'm double checking from the previous visual of this cover. This cover ends up sort of saying something a little different, I think, that it intended, which is like Lady J and the 3 Red Shadows. In a way that, with Destro peeking through, like he's sort of not as active. The other thing when I saw this cover that intrigued me, but I realized I was misinterpreting it. Wraith on the top left and Snake Eyes on the top center, they read as black and white because Wraith is just this all white metal light gray character and Snake Eyes is this all dark gray character, and their backgrounds don't have any obvious color. And then next to them there's Roadblock, and I can see the brown in his skin, and I thought, oh, are some of these squares black and white and some of these are color to differentiate characters who are dead versus living? And I thought, okay, so Roadblock's in color, he must be dead, because Lady J just died, so Roadblock must die in this issue. Well, Destro's got a red collar and a green eye. So I went down this very small rabbit hole, this mental rabbit hole, where I thought, oh, no. I think what's actually happening is that if you took the 3 foreground characters off, I think the backgrounds in the top row has very little color in it. And then the backgrounds in the second tier have a little more red, and the backgrounds in the third tier have a little more red, and then the backgrounds in the bottom, it's a gradient, right? So when you look all the way in the bottom left corner, past Flint's face and the barcode, right? That's a gray pink. And I thought, okay, what's happening is the background is sort of saturating as the cover goes down. It's not that some of these are black and white and some of these are color. It's that some of these have different backgrounds, and Wraith and Snake Eyes just read as black and white illustrations, black and white and gray illustrations. But I think you make a good point here, which is that they're the villains and they really needed a cover. They sort of demanded a cover.
Yeah.
And we've run out of covers, so they're getting the final one. But, final issues have historically offered readers a jumping off point. You might think logically that if you're reading a book, it's on issue 106 or, 13 or 702 and sales are going down and they're going to cancel the book. You'd think that readers who've been following the book for the last 6 months or year are really going to stick it out to the end. The opposite happens. Stores that are ordering this book might cut their numbers because it probably wasn't selling well from anyway, and they don't want to risk wasting even a few bucks on sort of a wounded, limping animal, to use a figure of speech. And if you're a reader and you haven't been invested in the book, you might think, I'm just not going to buy the final issue or two. And so there's this argument that the final issue needs a really compelling cover to sort of make sure all the stores order it and all the readers and subscribers and walk-ins ask for it and buy it. And this cover isn't quite that. But I do think this cover succeeds in that basic logical statement you just made, which is they're the big bads, so they should be on the cover, since they haven't been.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's the covers. What happens on the insides? Let me tell you, dear listener, with a plot breakdown. Della Eden has just killed Lady J, and as she is in the middle of taking Flint prisoner, Scarlet arrives and captures her instead. Scarlet then goes on to investigate leads to Eclipse Trading in Greece. Her intel uncovers links to a defense company named Umbra Systems and the schematics for a device called the Neural Enhancer, the secret to the Red Shadow's physical strength. Later, while Duke and Ray interrogate Della, General Mars Herring helps Della escape and is captured himself and revealed to be a traitor. Later at the Pentagon, he sacrifices himself in a detonation. The Red Shadows are gathered together at the Umbra Systems headquarters when the G.I. Joe team drop in. Flint captures Della and refuses to kill her, and Arthur is also captured. But Waldevan, the Red Shadow leader, escapes. General Joe Colton is revealed to still be alive, and in a Middle Eastern hospital, a man who may be Cobra Commander is recovering in a hospital and hears on the TV the news that the G.I. Joe team has been deactivated. The end. But the saga of G.I. Joe continues in G.I. Joe America's Elite, Issue 0.
So a helpful, for people who are just listening and not reading along, it might be helpful to point out, because I'll forget later on. In your plot breakdown, when you just mentioned that it's revealed that Joe Colton is still alive, we don't see him. It's just mentioned in dialogue.
Yeah, a little bit.
Whereas we do see who's probably Cobra Commander, a man with bandages on his head in a hospital bed.
Yeah, funny enough, the mention of Joe Colton was kind of a little bit throwaway in a dialogue from Duke, and it kind of slightly put me in mind of G.I. Joe the movie, where you hear that Duke is alive and he's come out of his coma, which is all done in overdub, because of course they originally made the film itself to have Duke die. So yeah, funny enough that being used in another way. But
to take that a further step, are you asking, did this comic originally intend Joe Colton to die in the previous issue and be dead? And did someone change their mind, or did someone higher up say, no, let's insert some dialogue that Joe Colton's okay?
It did cross my mind. Did somebody, did the writer or did editorial sort of say, well, Joe Colton, he's a good character. Maybe we shouldn't have him dead. Let's just insert a little bit of dialogue here to just say that he is alive after all, and then he's there if we want him. It did cross my mind.
We should make a note that if we get Mr. Brandon Jerwell back or Mr. Josh Blaylock back, we should ask them.
Funny enough, when we're talking about Joe Colton and Cobra Commander also being revealed to be alive, in Josh Eggerbean's summary, a friend of the show, Josh Eggerbean, on Yojo, his write up of this issue, in his summary he says General Joe Colton is revealed to still be alive and recovering in hospital. So I think that Josh, when he read that, well, in fact, in his more detailed one as well, the news report is being watched by General Joe Colton in the hospital bed, still very much alive. He has read that character on that final page to be Joe Colton, coming to. But
interesting. Yeah, interesting.
I think he missed a couple of important cues there. That first of all, he's in the Middle East, whereas Joe Colton, I think, was on American soil when he got injured, and the dialogue is more Cobra Commander, turn it up, the television, I want to hear it. And also just those eyes sort of in the bandages, it's sort of suggesting sort of the eyes behind the cowl. And also the story is about the reveal that Cobra Commander may be alive. It says, the militia's enigmatic leader, Cobra Commander, may still be at large. So yeah, I'm 100% convinced that is supposed to be Cobra Commander.
That dialogue you just did is the news reporter on the TV.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
One last comparison to this bit of audio insert in G.I. Joe the movie. The camera pan over the Joes after the big explosion where Doc over the radio says, good news, Duke is out of his coma, right? And then the Joes cheer. And then someone says something that feels like it could have come next, like good job, everyone, we did okay. Sort of as an editor, as a director, if you look at that sequence, you realize there was very little space for them to insert some dialogue that would make everything okay for Duke. It is seamless, right? It's not like they got some other actor to play Doc. It's not like, the dialogue's coming over while, like Falcon and Scarlet are like refilling the gas tank on the All Striker or something. Like, it actually works. And similarly, this panel at the end of this issue where Duke says, you'd only be half done, Vaughn. You left Joe Colton as close to death as could be, but that old warhorse flat out refused to die. There is enough physical space in this panel for one or two additional or longer word balloons if this fact about Colton was a change, was an addition. It's not like sometimes you see in a comic book, you see this in like Marvel comics, sometimes in the 70s and 80s where, and 90s where the letterer missed a word balloon. And so there's an additional word balloon on a panel that's definitely in someone else's lettering handwriting. And, the editor must have caught it, or the writer caught it. Or maybe in a few cases, the writer said, oh, I'm sorry, I know this has been lettered. I thought of another line of dialogue that really needs to be in this panel. I know it's going to crowd the art a little bit. Can we get someone to do this patch? And, the actual letterer isn't available, or based on where the artwork is, sort of the timing won't work. But if this is a sort of later in the process change, as with G.I. Joe the movie, it might stick out sort of logically and story-wise. It does not stick out in terms of like visuals or audio. It does look and read as seamless. But that's us talking about the end. Should we talk about either the beginning or top down, or do you want to start with something positive?
Oh dear, Tim. I really struggled with this issue. It kind of just didn't land for me. It isn't that I hated it. It just didn't really connect with me. And normally I feel like, I'm writing loads of notes of all the things I want to talk about. And there wasn't loads of things that kind of, stuck out for me as things like, okay, we have to dig into this particular point. So I'm kind of, my tank's a little bit empty on this one. I knew from memory that I didn't particularly, I sort of kind of lost interest in the last couple of issues of this run when they first came out. It didn't connect with me at the time, and it hasn't really on the reread. So I think I'll pass to you to for your top down.
Sure.
I'll be intrigued to see what you think.
Sure. After my not careful enough read of our previous issue, which resulted in a embarrassment where I really missed the point of the opening flashback, that Joe Colton is narrating it and he's in that scene. And the very thing that I said the scene and the issue needed to connect these new villains with the established characters was in fact there. That was embarrassing. I do admit I read some of that issue too fast. I did read this issue more carefully, and I realized that I was very hard on the previous issue, whether or not I misread an opening scene, and maybe my 4 should go to a 5 for the previous issue, my Yo-Joage score, because maybe the opening flashback does connect it better, even if it's, as the three of us were saying, doesn't quite work and it's sort of rushed and some of it's flat. But I realized with this issue, because the previous issue had to rush in setting up the villains and the stakes, that the previous issue sort of fell on its sword for this issue. And it allowed me to enjoy this issue more because I feel like we had, to some degree, and maybe mostly, gotten past the rushed establishment of these villains. This may not fully bear out, but I feel like, it's sort of like you read an issue that you don't like and then you read another issue. And if that next issue is the same, maybe you like it more or dislike it less. And this issue, I could just sort of concentrate on the action and, okay, Jerwa, it's your final issue, wrap up stuff. So my positives are that a lot happens in a good way, double-sized issue or not. It feels overloaded, but not like the previous issue. It feels a little crowded. The previous issue felt like 4 issues or a year of subplot in a double-sized issue. And this felt like, 3 or 4 issues in a double-sized issue. I also appreciate that it's a double-sized issue, and I love double-sized comics. I want more comics. Anniversary, final, premiere. I want more comics to be double-sized. And the economics of it now, are that's hard because that makes for, a $6 comic.
More is more.
Marvel and DC are sure enjoying the little spikes in sales and money they make from all these $9.99 comics. DC's been doing all these specials, these anniversary specials, or these character spotlights. Every 3 days out of the week, Marvel will do a 96-page $9.99 issue of Amazing Spider-Man because we will eat that up, and Marvel will keep doing it if we keep. Anyway, so but I will start I'll shift to a negative. Because unfortunately, my bad dialogue award goes to this issue and page 1, where Flint says, Della gives us some sort of half exposition, half character stuff to catch us up from the previous issue. And Flint says, you killed her. And, show don't tell. She's right in front of him. He saw it happen. It happened a moment ago. Maybe he's in shock. But he's a soldier and he's a professional. I know they're married, but I feel like he can have a reaction, which is angry or disbelieving. But I don't think he should be saying the thing that just happened. I feel like that dialogue is too much supposed to remind me of what happened in the previous issue. So on page 1, I was taken out of the narrative because, Flint's like, you stabbed her with that piece of shrapnel that you grabbed from the ground in front of me. It's like, I know, we know, you know. Sorry, let me shift back. Cause there was, I do have a note. One of the things that I liked about this issue, is that I think there's some good sort of logical progression in the plotting where Jerwa makes a couple good decisions in having sort of A lead to B. Or cause and effect. So, okay. And this is plotting. So, for example, on page 8, the Joes are back in their headquarters, and they've had this intelligence failure. They've been infiltrated in several different ways, and they're figuring out what to do, just the 3 or 4 or 5 of them. And Scarlet says, the firebomb used to kill the jugglers was paid for through one of their offshore accounts. First-hand information is all we can rely on now. And that does 2 things. 1, that motivates this undercover mission she takes on the next page, where she puts on a business suit and goes to Greece. And 2, it shows that they understand that they can't rely on sort of anything in a computer or anything secondhand. It's like if Duke says, "Oh, I heard something from someone else that I know from some other office," right? Well, that person might be compromised, or that information might be compromised. So that little bit of dialogue did some good sort of story lifting for me. And then Jerwa does it again on page 15 when Duke and General Ray go to visit Herring in jail. And there's a security breach while they're there, like a little red alert thing goes off. And they pop back out of the... Oh, I'm sorry. They're not visiting... They're not visiting Herring. They're visiting Della Eden. And on page 15, Ray and Duke pop back out of the jail cell, and there are those two guards with machine guns. And Ray says, "What's your assigned protocol for this alert, soldier?" He needs to know what they're supposed to do when this kind of red alert happens. And I thought, well, this is either some sort of convenient motivational dialogue so that the guard can say, well, there's that ladder over there that no one knows about. But I feel like it is a good sort of problem-solving exercise for Jerwa to move characters around in the jail cell, just outside the jail cell, down the hallway where this, I guess, elevator door is, where this secret ladder is, where the secret ladder goes up to the office where Ray and Duke are going to see red shadows having shot a bunch of people in an office they just walked through, or Herring just walked through. So I like that bit of dialogue. What's your assigned protocol for this alert, soldier? So we're supposed to stay with the prisoner, no exceptions. And then he says, "I need a rundown of our surroundings, including exit routes, equipment access, and anything else I think you should know." Right? And then the other one says, "Oh, there's a ladder that doesn't show up on schematics."
Yep. And as you're just sort of describing some of that, I was having a bit of a thought process in terms of kind of the makeup of this story and how it works, and what you were saying about maybe that it's less crowded than last issue or other issues. And it occurred to me that this story is a lot more linear in terms of the events unfolding compared to most of the other stories that we've read in the, well, almost all of the IDW era, but certainly Brandon Jerwa's era. It does move scene to scene, with each scene sort of progressing the next without too much sort of ping-ponging with sort of parallel plots going on. That we've got Flint versus Della. She's captured. Then we're back with the Joes at their base. They talk about the next mission they'll go on. Scarlet goes on that mission. That pretty much concludes. Then we're back at the prison to check in with Duke and Della and Ray. There's the breakout. Once that's done, they want to deal with the consequences of that, and they're dealing, they've got now all of the intel from Scarlet. What next? It's the tower in New York where the Joes have found out about, and that's where all the red shadows are. So the red shadows are now there. Then the Joes go to that tower. They have the big confrontation, and there's a winner and a loser. Essentially, it's a lot more, sort of story beat, all moving in the one singular direction.
And the previous issue really suffered from that 2 pages of news reports about 5 or 6 or 8 terrorist attacks.
Yeah,
which was, in a movie, I feel like that kind of telling, not showing montage could be effective, because you'd also have music and sound, and the camera would like cut in close to like the news reporter's face, and you'd see the sort of grid pattern on the TV, for emphasis. And in the previous issue, that 2 pages was drawn sort of presentationally. It didn't have any oomph. And this issue doesn't have 2 pages of news reporters telling us that bad things have happened about places that we haven't been before.
Yeah.
There is, so there's 2 examples that I just gave where I feel like Jerwa's got some good moving the story along dialogue. There's one that I ran into, which I wasn't sure if it was good or bad. So I wanted to ask you, on the previous page from where Ray's asking the guards about their protocol, Ray and Duke are talking to Della Eden. So this is page 14. And Ray says, what's so brilliant about Vaughn's plan? You've targeted Cobra and G.I. Joe alike. Why? Della says. When you used a nuclear weapon on Cobra Island, you gave us no choice but to act. And I thought, finally, someone's acknowledging what a big deal this was, besides me 20 years later in a podcast. And then she continues, did you consider the dangerous to the environment or even the human race? Of course not. You are as much a threat as Cobra.
The next panel's the best panel in the book. Wrong answer, lady. Thwack. And Duke just kicks her.
Kicks her out of her chair. She's handcuffed. This comic came out in 2005. And, like news about enhanced... What's the word?
Interrogation protocols.
Yes, enhanced interrogation. That was a big news event. And the TV series 24 on Fox... like Jack Bauer would like yell at and then like punch and like lightly torture some of his captives, like, where's the bomb? And that stuff sort of creeps into the public consciousness. And then maybe sort of the level is raised and it's like, well, it's okay if Duke does it because Jack Bauer did it. So I didn't like that panel, although Della Eden is like the fourth worst person in the world right now. So maybe it's justified.
But he's not asking, he's not asking her difficult questions about where the bomb is or anything. He was just annoyed by her answer. Right?
Well,
you're getting a booting.
Yeah, I think that is so that Duke can have some release because Lady J's just been killed and other Joes were killed 2 issues ago, and there are, there's 2 pages of terrorist attacks in the previous issue that we're being told about. But going back to Della Eden's dialogue, right? She says, we had to act because you dropped a nuke. Did you even consider the dangers? You are as much a threat as Cobra. And I wanted to ask you, do the bits of dialogue in this final issue between Wilder, Arthur, and Della, are they enough of an explanation for how and why the Red Shadows exist and what they want to do? Because I feel like we finally get some explanation in this issue. Like, they've got a building in New York, it turns out, with a greenhouse, which I want to come back to. And Wilder Vaughn has 1 or 2 speeches in this issue, or not speeches, bits of dialogue to a Joe or to Arthur where he says, we're wiping the system clean and we're starting over, and it's less about violence and more about sort of like fairness or parity. And I thought Parity, not Parody. And I thought, am I just relieved that we're finally getting this? Did we get some of it before and I didn't notice it because it was vague? How does this work for you? The Red Shadows sort of explanation.
There's been drips and drabs sort of coming through, but I don't know if it's entirely satisfying. Like she's saying, you use a nuclear weapon on Cobra Island, and that meant that we had to act. But I think even before then, they'd been killing a few of the Joes off. So the nuclear bomb on Cobra Island, that was 2 issues ago, like 41, I think. So I think most of the other killings of Cobras and Joes had already happened to that point. So it's not really a valid justification. And then I think I didn't completely get all of the plot about what the Red Shadows were up to, but there was a sort of funny bit of creepy dialogue from Wilder Vaughn. He said, my appreciation is sincere, talking to Della here, and this is precisely the reason why I believe you should take your rightful place as the mother of our new world. The mother? Oh, I would be honored. The honor would be mine. You and I will lead the battle, but our progeny will lead to the new order. So maybe the plot is just about an excuse to get some sexy time with Della.
I was of 2 minds of that dialogue. I thought, okay, well, the good news is that this is very different from what Cobra wants, and if you're gonna have this other, like Cobra. Speaking of G.I. Joe the movie, Cobra Law is interesting in G.I. Joe the movie because it wants something different than Cobra, right? Destro's Grenadiers in Larry Hama's G.I. Joe comics. Destro as a faction is interesting because he wants something different than Cobra Commander. as long as the Red Shadows are doing sort of just what Cobra's doing, it's sort of not enough. You sort of then wonder why wasn't Cobra sort of powerful enough to stop them. So I appreciate the different take, the different stakes. So this thing about Umbra, on page 19, we see the Umbra logo, and Scarlet explains something, and I felt like I was sort of being artificially caught up on things. So Scarlet, she says, if it's accurate, Vaughn and his followers have been planning for decades. The Red Shadows are unlike anything we faced before. They want to do no less than completely reorder human society. I thought, okay. And then she says, with her sort of hand in that like, ta-da, pointing back to the computer screen behind her. To do this, they plan to replace all organized government and religion with a single global technocracy. And I thought, what? Okay, that's very specific considering how vague the Red Shadows have been up until now. And at the same time, that's very vague because how would you replace all governments and religion? Like, no, that's impossible. It's like, are they going to do this with nanites or something? Or like a gas? Are they going to hypnotize people? And she continues, ever heard of Umbra Secure System Portals? And I thought, no. And she continues. And I'm thinking like, oh, did I miss something in the previous issue or the previous issues? Is this a real world thing? And now Jurwa through Scarlet is going to tell me about it. And she continues, they're the #1 operating system for military weapons arrays used by dozens of countries. And I thought, okay, cool. I don't know if I buy that, but okay. And then she finishes, they're based in New York City and connected to Eclipse, which is that company that she had just gone to Greece for, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So this panel feels like the apex of, or maybe I should say the nadir of a long planned storyline getting compressed into just a few issues, where sort of the how and why of it is crunched down into 6-word balloons. And I feel like either one of the Red Shadows should be like walking down a hallway with a captive president or a lesser Red Shadow and explaining how this is going to work. Or a Red Shadow should be like on TV threatening the Eiffel Tower or something, or a bunch of like all the people making a pilgrimage to Mecca if they're going to replace all religion, and like pushing a button and like actually doing it. It's like, okay, now all the Muslims making the pilgrimage to Mecca don't believe in that. They will follow the Red Shadows now. So, you know, again, if the writer Brandon Jurwa has only 48 pages and 48 pages to tell a story that he'd planned for, you know, 100 pages, 150 pages, 200 pages, 300 pages, you're going to get panels like this. And I would rather it sort of get explained than completely left out. But he's got a real juggling act here to sort of make it satisfying enough, but not too crowded, but not too rushed, but not too vague. And in this juggling, that's what I was saying before. I think this issue juggles better than the previous. But this thing about Umbra, right? So, I mean, this is still a, you know, sort of a fantasy sci-fi comic, right? They're the #1 operating system for military arrays, weapons arrays, used by dozens of countries. Okay, in the G.I. Joe world, that must be true.
Yeah, it's sort of introduced somewhat as a MacGuffin, sort of saying, right, okay, there's this company, Umbra Systems. They've got, you know, very powerful because their systems control lots of weaponry or whatever all over the world. And bingo bango, that's why they're the big bad and can destroy the world. And that's why they're such a threat and need to be dealt with. But it's kind of not quite a big reveal because it doesn't seem necessarily big enough, but it sort of put in as the context. This is the thing. This is part of our world. Let's keep on moving on.
This draws two comparisons. What are some cases in G.I. Joe where the bad guys are related to a company or a technology and they can surprise us? Well, in the cartoon, Cobra has extensive enterprises. And in the Devil's Due comic, Cobra has extensive enterprises right on its side. And also Cobra has Mars. And those aren't explored as much as they might be in the episodes, in the earlier Devil's Due issues, in the entire Marvel run. But I have a really warm feeling because Extensive Enterprises is so well established in just a few episodes of the G.I. Joe cartoon. Tom X and Zaymot are so fun and funny. The Joes, sneak in at night in the 1985 episode Red Rocket's Glare, even though there's some like bonker stuff with like gymnastics poles between the buildings as a weird security system. Anyway. And, Mars is established in like one sentence of a file card in 1983, 4. But then, gets used here and there. So I want to be sort of shocked by and excited about and interested in Umbra and Eclipse, but there's not a lot of room for it. Speaking of page 19, I was a little thrown off. So the first panel of page 19, there's a yellow sky and there are a bunch of vehicles pulling up to this building that's got fencing around it. And the next panel tells me where we are. We're at the G.I. Joe Operations Center. But then I thought, wait a minute, back on page 7, there's a very different looking building with a morning sky, sort of a pink morning sky. Or maybe that's a sunset sky that says G.I. Joe Operations Center. Now, a G.I. Joe Operations Center could be very big, and there could be different parts of the complex, different buildings. Or was it the second or third arc in the Devil's Due run established that G.I. Joe had lots of different bases, like in Chicago and in Nevada or something. But I got confused here because I thought, wait, is this the same G.I. Joe Operations Center?
I want to jump in and put you out of your misery, Tim.
Okay.
I think what we're seeing on that top panel is a coloring error. I think that is a continuation of the previous scene. So while Devaughn has got onto a helicopter and is escaping from the prison, the prison which is just outside Sperryville, Virginia, 80 miles west of Washington, D.C. And this is the backup coming to stop the escape, driving in, and they're saying that we're too late. They've got away. And that should be colored the same sky as the panel previously.
Wow, very good. My misery is out. Put out. Wow, that's fascinating. Normally I'd be all like grumpy, like shaking my fist, like colorist, editor, catch this stuff. But I just think it's so fascinating that one small thing can throw off a scene for me so much. And I imagine a lot of people who read this didn't quite pick up on sort of anything wrong with it. And I'm happy for you. That's nice. Fascinating. Okay.
I must admit that I didn't pick up on it on my first read. I think I must have glossed over it and just thought, yeah, it's the introductory sort of shot to the next panel. It was only when you start talking about it, it was like, oh right, yeah, that's what's happened.
This is perhaps a gentle nudge for everyone who's writing comics that you can have a scene go one panel onto the next page, but the end of a page and the next page, or a page turn, is a natural break.
Yeah.
It's like before digital projection, when you went to the movies, you can only fit about 18 minutes of film on a reel. So like up in the projection booth, the film gets shipped. Your hour and a half, your 2-hour film, your 2.5-hour film gets shipped, not all in one giant piece, because that would be like the circumference. It'd be like an extra large pizza, right? You snip the film into like 18-minute reels, and you ship each reel. You ship them all together, right? And then the projectionist has to like deal with it. This is before digital projection, which is just a hard drive. But film directors and editors knew that a reel change could be a natural place for a scene change, because a reel change is a like slightly distracting, loud like jump in the theater where like, you might hear like a from like the speakers as the like optical track gets. Anyway, I'm getting in the weeds, but if you put a reel change in the middle of a scene, it might be a little distracting because there's like a little pop right when someone's talking to someone else. But someone finishes talking and they sigh and they look over and you have a beat, and then you have the reel change. So maybe your all other things being equal, your best natural scene break is the end of one page and the beginning of another.
Yes, very good, and that is is how it is done throughout. As you were saying, that it is how it is done throughout most of the issue. It will be the new scene begins first page, so first panel of any page, albeit that there is another example about if you flick 4 page turns back or so from where we were, where it's the last sequence from that, was it Eclipse, it's something in Greece, where Scarlet has done a high kick and then is escaping in a van. The escape in the van is the top 2 panels of 1 page, and then the next panel, the third panel of that page, is the scene change, and it's a sort of similar to what we just saw.
Yeah, without the coloring mistake.
Yeah,
I just want to point out this jumping kick from Scarlet to me feels very much like a Kevin Eastman, Peter Laird Ninja Turtles kick. I feel like I've seen this kick in a good way. I feel like I've seen this kick in a black and white Ninja Turtles comic from 1985, 1988. In terms of formatting, since we're talking about formatting, the scene where Flint, so we're now in the second half of the book, and it's drawn by Tim Seeley. The scene where Flint he's left the briefing and he's gone on his own. He's gone on ahead to the Umbra corporate headquarters in New York City, and it's nighttime and it's raining, and he's got his binoculars. What is he holding? A weapon? Oh yeah, a weapon. Right in the final panel.
Oh yeah, shotgun thing.
Thank you. Yes, shotgun. So there are 2 panels of him looking grim in the rain, and then 2 panels that are in red, and they're flashbacks. And this to me feels very much like these 2 issues were possibly originally concepted as 4 issues, because I feel like you wouldn't do this flashback, because I guess technically the scene where Della stabs Lady J did happen in the previous issue. But I feel like it's the last page of the previous issue, and when I got to this panel, these 2 panels of the flashback, I thought, well, that's the first scene of this very issue. Like, Flint is having a flashback for his benefit and for my benefit of something that I basically saw happen 23 pages ago. And it reminds me of the current new DC Comics, Mark Waid, Dan Nomura, Batman, Superman, World's Finest series, which is great. And the first issue, there's a flashback in the second half of it to the first half of it, which is weird. And I thought, oh, was this originally serialized as like an 11-page chapter online and a different 11-page chapter online? And so it made sense like a week or 2 later to have a flashback to the previous story, because why would you have it's like, no, I know this happened. I just read it like 10 pages ago.
The Flint sequence, I maybe this will be my highlight from, because I didn't single out a highlight, but I did quite like it. He's there looking grim and determined, and you as you read the sequence, you're thinking, oh Flint, you're going it alone. You're going out for revenge. You're not being part of the team, and you're going to fall flat on your face. You're going to get killed, or you're going to get captured, and it would be much better working as part of the G.I. Joe team. And lo and behold, that is actually what happened. He was, while we were led up the garden path thinking he's going grim and gritty solo revenge mission, he is actually just the spearhead for the wider team. I like the dialogue as he's getting it into the building and talking to the sort of the front desk receptionists. Excuse me, I know it's late, but office hours are 8 till 6. I just need a minute of your time. Office hours are 8 till chunk chunk. How may I help you, sir? I thought that was a cute sequence. And then there on the following page, there's something that doesn't quite work. Very close to working, but doesn't quite work, which is where Flint is working his way through the building. Turns around and there's Artur, the big Russian, who punches him in the face. We got quite a cool shot of sort of a close up of a fist with sort of foreshortened Artur behind it, woomph, punching him out. And then the last panel of this page is just a solid black panel indicating that Flint has been KO'd. He's out for the count. the thing that maybe doesn't work quite so well is that this whole sequence has got black gutters, so all of the gaps between the panels up to the borders of the page are coloured black. So rather than seeing a black panel that indicates that Flint has been KO'd, it just kind of reads a little bit like an absence of art on the page.
Yeah, I had a similar reaction. So there is this modern tendency in comic books to make comics more alike and treat comics more like the cinema, like movies, like film. And there are many similarities, right? And I will refer to the 180-degree rule, or like not breaking it, not crossing the 180-degree line. I'll talk about jump cuts, right, when I'm referring to comic books. But of course, those are film terms. You know, film has shots and edits and cuts, whereas comics have panels. But they're very similar. There's a lot of overlap. But if you did this in a movie scene, it would work because the sound would drop out. You'd have a sudden build with like a little bit of drums or like a music swell, like half a second long, leading up to this punch and the sound effect. And then you'd cut to black and all the sound would drop out, except for maybe the whoomph, which is either the actual impact or like Flint hitting the ground. And then you'd maybe keep it black and quiet for 2 seconds, or maybe you'd immediately cut to the next scene to sort of keep the energy going. But the moment that the screen goes black, in a movie theater, everything goes black. And in a movie, in TV and film, you're only looking at one image at a time. But in reading comics, and this is where they're different, even though you're really only reading one panel at a time, your eyeballs and your brain are taking in all the panels on the page and the other page. Which is why designing a page and designing 2 pages with this in mind, sort of that your reader is going to see it all at once, is part of the game. And so I think it would work better if the gutters on this page were light gray or white. But I think it would still read as a weird kind of wide rectangular hole. And here's an example of how you could do it differently but get a similar effect. What if the panel after this sort of POV punch, this fist coming at us, what if it were not short and wide? What if it were sort of the same shape and size as the previous panel where Flint's looking over his shoulder? But what if it's now him lying on the ground, like head and shoulders or torso and head, and his eyes are closed or mostly closed, and you have a like darkening gradient from the top of the panel coming down, like we're putting like a black curtain, like a black like mesh sort of over him, or the background is like all black and white but Flint is in color, or something like that, where you're using less of the visual language of like film editing and more of the graphical visual language of comics, where you can separate the foreground from the background sort of emotionally, and it would be sort of POV emotionally for Flint. This is what he's seeing, this is what he's feeling, but we are seeing him, and you cement it that much more. Like, no, his eyes are closing, he's losing consciousness. And here's another thing, which I'm sure, Mark, you see on this page, and you didn't call it out. Another case on this page where this page is trying to do what movies do, where Artur's fist is in focus, and Artur behind the fist is very slightly out of focus. And that's probably something that the colorist did. And it may be a decision from the colorist, or it may be a note from Tim Seeley, the penciler, like in the margins. And that's fun, but that's a thing you do in film with like rack focus, where like you have a shallow depth of field where the amount of the closest distance from the camera lens and the farthest distance from the camera lens that are all in focus in this case is very small, because there's only a few inches that separate this fist from this head. But if you're just drawing comics, you're not thinking so much about things in focus and out of focus optically. You are drawing things that are closer with more tightness or detail, and you're drawing things in the background maybe with less tightness or detail because they're not important or you don't have time, but much less because it's like the camera can or can't get it. And so this is not an overall criticism. Comics, if you want to make your comics more like movies, that's fine. like one of my favorite comic book stories, which is written and drawn by Bruce Timm. It's a Two-Face story. It's only 8 pages long. It was originally published in Batman Black and White, the original series, number 1. I think it was number 1, the first series. But it's been reprinted once or twice since then. And every page just has 8 rectangular panels that are all the same shape and size. And Bruce Timm is not varying his the sort of rhythm of his panels at all, because he's basically just storyboarding a short animated episode of Batman, even though he's technically drawing comics. So you can make your comics like film, like animation. That's fine, but it should always work if you're going to do it.
Actually, well, talking about some of the things that we can do in comics as a medium put me in mind of actually another panel. It was the same panel that we were talking about before with the reveal of the Umbra logo where Scarlet is talking. On the bottom right-hand corner of that page, you've got Flint leaning against a wall with crossed arms, and then on the page turn, you've got this exactly the same picture of Flint, but now as a close-up. And I suspect that it may have just been drawn once and statted into possibly the smaller one would make more sense.
I'm doing it back and forth. You might be right.
Anyway, just a curious aside. I thought to myself, I wonder if Tim will pick up on that one.
That is something that happens a lot more in comics with the advent of Photoshop. It was happening in the 70s and 80s and 90s with just regular photocopiers, Xerox machines. Sometimes you could tell because if you do it like 3 panels in a row, the first panel is the art, and the second and third panels are very, very, very slightly darker. The lines are a little thicker. I generally don't like it. I think you should redraw a panel because I find it graphically distracting, but in sort of the meaning of comics, I have a longer definition for why, but I'll skip here. In this case, it's okay. Maybe because there's so much else going on in the issue.
Yep.
There's 1 or 2 bits of storytelling here which were a little unclear for me. So, okay, first a good thing and then maybe not a good thing. Page 17, Ray and Duke have made it up the ladder, and they're peeking out of a closet or something, and they're seeing sort of the same point of view that we saw a few pages earlier where Herring was being escorted in. We saw guards, and now we see all the guards dead on the ground, slumped over at desks, and Wilder is telling the sort of masked Red Shadows to exterminate whoever they find. And that's a great bit of storytelling where Santa Lucia is showing us that Ray sees that this has all happened, right? There's a close-up on the final panel of the previous page, right, where Ray says, "Good Lord." And then he's very, very small and dark, but actually close to the center of this panel, right under Wilder Fawn's word balloons. Okay, so I like that. So then you go down, and Duke says, "Phones are dead." And then you go down, and Herring has menacingly pulled his pistol, and you think he's going to shoot the 2 guards that were outside of Delia's cell. One of them sees it about to happen. And then in a very small panel, her cell door opens, and you hear the sound effect, blam, blam. Right? I guess it's comics. You don't hear it. You see the sound effect. Blam, blam. And so then in the next little panel, her handcuffs are off, and she and Herring are in front of another doorway. And then in the final panel on the page, this is page 17, Ray and Duke are rushing towards them, and Ray says, "Freeze, Herring, it's over." And then you turn the page, and Herring says, "Della," and she has her hand up, and I don't quite know what she's doing. And so he decides that he'll sacrifice himself. And then Duke slams Herring against the wall. And I got confused the first time I read this. I thought, wait, is she going back into her cell? Her cell has like a keypad on it and a yellow and black diagonal, like construction-y pattern on it. And it turns out to be an elevator door, which has a red light over it. Like, her door swings on a hinge, the elevator door opens from the center. But I found the storytelling here was it didn't quite have enough space, because I sort of needed to see Della and Herring like walk down the hallway away from her cell toward the elevator door. And what I instead get is her standing in a doorway and then standing in a doorway. And so it's not like a mistake and unclear, but it could be clearer. So after I turned the page, I thought, wait, if she's going back to her cell, what's the sacrifice? Like, then Herring will just get thrown in a cell too. And then I thought, oh, okay, there's an elevator versus a door. And I guess the elevator hadn't been properly...
I think I had almost exactly the same thought process that you had reading these bits. I think it's just a little bit too shortened. For example, the shooting of the guards, blam, blam, is on the same panel that she's walking out of the cell and saying, get the keys. You know, it's just too much happening all at once. And then I think one of the key elements that causes confusion is that you kind of got this light purpley grey on the elevator door, and the same colouring being applied to the cell door.
Right.
And because you're looking at Della standing in front of these doors, there's just not enough to indicate that immediately, without kind of going back and rereading and scratching your head a bit to make you realise actually they've moved from the cell into the elevator.
Yeah, so I was about to say a moment ago that the elevator needs to be established, and I caught myself. It is established on the previous page. The door opens over 2 panels from closed to open, and Herring comes out of it with a pistol. So yes, good. The elevator is established. What's not established is that there is a hallway, that the elevator is on, I guess, one end of it, and Della's cell is, I guess, on the other end of it. And the way that Santa Lucia so well establishes this room at the top of this page 17, with all the red shadows and all the dead guards, right? You see floor, you see close wall, you see far wall, you see ceiling, you see the space where Ray is hiding. As much as I like this big panel, which very clearly lays out sort of where people are in that scene, I think that panel wanted to be smaller to give more room to the hallway thing. But this is a lot to ask of this page. And this is where this arc starts to remind me of the first 4 issues of this series of Reinstated, where writer Josh Blaylock is, remember there were like 7, 8, 9 panels per page on many pages, and scenes last like 2 pages and we jump somewhere else, and none of those were double-sized issues. But in terms of how much ground is covered, a lot of these final 2 issues as 4 issues sort of reminds me of the first 4 issues of this series. So jumping ahead to something that I had a question about, but it's sort of less of a storytelling thing. On page 26, this is the page opposite where Flint is out in the rain and we have that red flashback. On page 26, it's across from Flint out in the rain and the 2 panels of red flashback. Umbra's corporate headquarters are in New York City, and I guess there are no other tall buildings near this one tall building. I'm not sure any part of New York works like that, but okay. The 3 head red shadows are giving a speech to these regular red shadows, and the greenhouse has been referred to, or is about to be, and we see it here. And Wilder Vaughn is giving his speech in front of it, and he says, while our time is just beginning, and he spreads his arms out in front of the garden, maybe to sort of accentuate the garden behind him. And I thought, is this a part of their plan? Is there some dialogue that's coming, like, oh, the mind control gas is an extract of this rare plant that we're growing here, or we're going to poison everyone from this plant that we're growing here. Or then I thought, okay, well, if they're wiping out the world and starting over, are they going to grow food from here? Okay, well, there's that line where Della can be sort of the mother of the new world. Is this like a Garden of Eden visual analogy? And then I thought, I would like to ask Brandon Jurwa. I imagine the answer is either ran out of space, ran out of time, or it's something that Jerwa or Tim Seeley put in so that it's not one more like tech headquarters with, computer screens and a desk and like buttons behind it. So I like it because it's different, but it starts to ask a question for which in this comic book, there is not an answer.
Mm.
And it's not like, Chekhov's gun. It's not like Flint rushes in and he's like, oh, good, I can set fire to all these plants and like force everyone out of the greenhouse. It's like, nope, there's just some plants.
Yeah, I feel like I kind of almost was reading between the lines on that one, thinking, yeah, it must be part of their plan. They're talking about, sort of their, almost a rebirth of the world. Della's the new, after they've wiped out the world, Della's the new mother, and maybe I guess having a greenhouse full of plants might be good for that. But yeah, it's not. It's not kind of quite there, is it? It's like something's unsaid.
And so in terms of this greenhouse, the plants which like start to ask a question for which there is no answer, and that sky coloring mistake where it's like it's important that colors get right so I don't conflate things. So here's an example of these two things coming together. So turn the page, and all right, so that was 26. So now we're on 27, 28. Okay, so page 28, Washington, D.C., the Joes are getting out of the helicopter, and there is a photograph of a sky as the sky, which I don't like. I think colorists in comics should, even if they're looking at a photo, I think they should paint those clouds. But okay.
And an unusual technique, actually, for Devil's Due. We've not seen a lot of that.
Correct. And if you want to get into it, I can explain why. But I find the short version is I find it distracting because it doesn't agree with the art. But on the next panel, there's some kid standing behind Hawk in a wheelchair, and he's got spiky red hair. And I thought, who's this? And then Ray calls him Kamakura, and I thought, interesting. Have we seen Kamakura? And the answer is, I'm sure we have. I just sort of, when I think of him, I always think of him with his full costume on. I thought, I didn't know he had red hair, or, I didn't quite remember he had red hair. And then, amazingly, in New York City, at the front desk of the Umbra corporate headquarters on the next page, when Flint comes in from the rain, Kamakura is the night watchman at the front desk and in the lobby of the Umbra corporate headquarters. Oh, wait, no. That's because Tim Seeley drew a similarly young person with the same hairstyle, and colorist Brett R. Smith. It's not exactly the same color. There's more like blue purple in Kamakura's hair, and there's more brown yellow in the receptionist's hair. But they look like the same person, and I guess technically the receptionist has some freckles, so let's call him Archie. So Archie Andrews grows up and gets a job in New York. Good for him. And this is a very small thing, and I'm like sort of making fun of it, but it reminds me of that comment I made several episodes ago where there's like one random Cobra interior, and there's a like slim Cobra office worker with long black hair and like round glasses. It's like, is that the Baroness? Like, I'm sorry, you probably can't have any random Caucasian women in Cobra who are just like walking around with long black hair and round glasses, because I'm gonna think it's the Baroness. So, give this guy a goatee.
Oh dear. He tried. He's got stubble, but he just didn't have long enough to prepare for the role.
I have one more sort of major art thing that I want to say, and then we can do some wrap up. I have been hard on Tim Seeley's art since he's first started drawing for this book, and one of my refrains is that he draws a lot of straight on shots. He draws a lot of 1-point perspective. So if the wall in front of you, if you're looking at it straight on, like if you're in like the middle of a hallway looking straight down, or if you're anywhere in a room but you're looking, if the walls on your left and right, if you're parallel to those and the wall in front of you, you're perpendicular to it, that's 1-point perspective. And Seeley does a lot of that, and I think it's because he's not comfortable drawing a lot of 2-point and 3-point perspective. 2-point would be if you're in that room or that hallway, and you rotate your head the slightest bit or a lot to the left or right. 1 degree, 10 degrees, 89 degrees, right? If you rotate your head 90 degrees, you are back in 1-point perspective, now looking at a different wall. And then 3-point perspective would be if you tip your head up or down a little bit from that rotating your head. Okay, so here's a good comparison in the same comic book, right? So page 19, the panel with the miscolored yellow sky, when we are looking into the big panel in the middle where Scarlet is standing and the Joes are around her, right? Notice how the camera is higher than all the Joes. And we know that because we can see the tops of their heads. We can see their shoulders. So we're looking down at them. So this is 3-point perspective. It's not amazing. It's pretty good. And then turn the page, and on page 20, the next page, panel 5, right, the final panel of the page, the Joes realize that Flint is gone, and Ray's saying, "Flint." Notice how you can see the ceiling. And then on the next page, Santa Lucia does it one more time with the first panel where the limo, the driver is opening the limo door, and we're looking up at the buildings, right? This is 3-point perspective. There are 3 vanishing points, one on the left, one on the right, one way up off the page. It's like 6 inches off the page, right? And Santa Lucia does this a lot, right? If you look down at a checkerboard floor, or you look up at a hallway or like ceiling, and there's like a grid on it, and it's not perfect squares, it's like diamonds or parallelograms. That's 3-point perspective. Okay, so Santa Lucia is doing it all over in his half the book. Now we were on 21 with the buildings. Turn ahead to page 23. So it's Seeley's first page where it says chapter 4, the Pentagon, right? So what's the second panel? 1-point perspective. We're in the middle of the hallway. We're looking straight down at Herring. What's the second panel? 1-point perspective. We are looking perpendicular at the wall. What's the next panel? 1-point perspective, right? We are looking straight at some Joes past Herring. And then in the final panel, what's the perspective? Well, there is none because there's no background, but it's 1-point perspective, right? And then what happens when you turn the page past the ad? First panel on page 24, this is not 3-point perspective, even though we're looking down. This is isometric perspective because all the verticals, the up-down of the doorway, the up-down of the table leg, those are straight lines and they're all parallel to each other. Isometric perspective doesn't really exist. That's what architects use. That's what like old video games use, like Zaxxon or Paperboy or new retro video games. And so here at last, rather than comparing a panel to some panel in another comic book or some other illustration, I can compare a panel in this issue to another panel in this very issue. And then, Seeley draws handsomely throughout the whole issue and his storytelling is good. But do you find something, I'm asking Mark sort of for an answer or sort of rhetorically, do you find something sort of plain about this splash page on the next page where Ray and Duke are getting thrown by the explosion? Is there something like not dynamic about it? There's something sort of too like straight and up and down and flat. And that's because there is no perspective in it, which is to say it's like 1-point perspective. For something as dynamic as a splash page of 2 guys getting hurled by a big explosion. So I'm really glad Santa Lucia draws half of these final 2 issues because his stuff is really good. His storytelling's good. His drawing of tech and his perspective. And as a comparison, shows where Seeley still, as of 2005, has some learning to do.
Shall we talk about the grand finale to the issue now?
Yeah.
So the Joe team come at this tower from above. Flint's there already, and he has some sort of tracking device on his chest, which lets them know exactly where he is, and they come in, and in fairly short order, they smash through the top of the greenhouse. They find out what the Red Shadow's weakness was, which is that if you hit them and shoot them, then they get overloaded. You found my weakness. And then they sort of seem to win in fairly short order, just in time for a wrap-up of the issue in the series.
So my 2 major thoughts on this are, while I don't think you should kill characters in, franchises, in comic books, it's like, don't kill Batman because someone's going to want to write Batman next month and in 5 years and in 10 years. And like, don't kill Barbara Gordon or Alfred or like Tim Drake's friend either, for that matter. I did expect some Red Shadows to die at the end of this story. And I was surprised, and I think a little let down, when they weren't, because unlike a Destro or a Cobra Commander or a Major Blood, who get the Tim Don't Kill label, the Red Shadows to me are disposable. I did think that they were invented so that they could be offed, or at least one of them. And also, they represent for me a couple of things that I don't love about this run, and so I want to see them gone. But Jerwa, quite fairly, maybe decided, no, one day I may be able to write these characters again. Devil's Due may have the license for a long time. The Joe Casey relaunch may not, work out. And if not me getting back the main book in a year or 5, maybe I'll get to do a miniseries or a special. And so if he liked these characters and he saw a future in them, I can also imagine maybe Hasbro said, don't kill these characters. Because even though from our interview with Blaylock, it sounds like halfway through and later in the Devil's Due Hasbro relationship, Hasbro was a little less involved, maybe in terms of, no, this is still a toy and we're selling toys to kids, don't make it too violent. Maybe someone at Hasbro, as much attention as they were paying to this book, maybe they thought, well, we can make some Red Shadows toys, maybe. So that's my first sort of thought on the finale. I'll hold my second one for a minute. What do you think about them being dispatched in fairly short order and not being fully dispatched?
I think you're probably on the nose in terms of the motivation behind it. I think, as you explain it, I think that Brandon's motivation that maybe these are characters he's established and can come back to at some point in the future, that sort of rings like a solid reason for not killing any of these 3 main antagonists that have been introduced, leaving them back in the toy box to return to at some point in the future. After kind of the slow reveal of those, the mystery of the Joes being killed and sort of building them up as these grand menace, it did seem like they were defeated very quickly by a very small force. But I can see that they only had so many pages, and in terms of the way that it was handled, it wasn't like it was incredibly. It didn't feel like too jarring. Like, no way, and the Joes could never pull that off. But yeah, it did seem like quite quick order. But there we go. The issue and the arc had to finish at some point.
Since I was talking about film versus comics, hey, in this final scene, the 5th from the final page breaks the 180-degree rule, where Flint is on the left looking at Della. She's on the right. You've lost, Della. And his gun is in her face. And then with the red background in the middle, she's now on the left and Flint is on the right. And the scene is so straightforward, right? It's not important. There's not a third character. There's not a doorway. They're like, are they in the door or out of the door, in the room, out of the room? You can follow it, but it's a little jarring. It's like, wait, no, did they just flip? No, oh, I see. We flipped. We, the reader, the camera flipped.
If Hammer was writing this as well, he'd probably come back with a note back to Seeley, on what is that gun that you've drawn? That doesn't look like a recognizable gun.
I really thought at the very least that one of the Red Shadows would die. Like, it's going to be Artur, right? Like, he's the sort of the tough, mean one, like Della is... her costume is more interesting. Her look is more interesting. We don't have a lot of women characters in G.I. Joe. She's gotten, I think, more dialogue. She got to do the thing. She got to kill Lady J. It's like, oh, kill the big guy, right? Like, no, he gets away.
A bit like the what were the baddies from Superman? Superman 2, the Kryptonians,
Zod, and something, and it's 3 letters with an N. Oh, I'm sorry, God. Superman fans. Non? It's okay. Anyway. I mean, what Brandon Jerwa is setting up here is that Wilder, Arthur, and Della are going to get banished to the Phantom Zone. Thank you. Okay, so my other comparison here is in the final 5-10 pages of the book, the villains are in a building in New York, and the Joes attack it. And we have seen this before in G.I. Joe comics in parts 2 and 3 of the Snake Eyes trilogy, right? When Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow and Stalker go into the Cobra consulate building in issues 95 and 96. And issue 95, I think, is my favorite comic book, period.
Wow.
Right? If I had to pick one, and I don't want to pick one, and it's also like the 10th comic book I ever read. So it's there's a lot of nostalgia there. But the sense of sneaking into a building, and, in this scene, in the Devil's Due scene, it's raining, and it doesn't really add anything to the scene. This isn't like, John Romita Jr. the last 20 years has drawn a couple really great covers or pinups of the Amazing Spider-Man on a ledge outside at night in the rain. And then he did one of Batman recently. Like, that is so much about mood and, the texture, wet, dark, and rain and slippery. Okay, so what happens in issue 95, 96? I haven't read them in a long time, but there's a scene in like a sub-basement with a night viper, and Stalker, and he's going up some stairs, and you really get the sense of the building. And they make their way higher and higher, and then I forget what it is, but something explodes, and a little bit of the building is like there's a section of floor that's leaning or crashing out the window. It feels very much like, the end of an action movie, or like is it Transformers 2 or 3, where they're in a building that's like leaning back and forth? Anyway, and they're sliding, and Michael Bay is like screaming at me in the audience. So, the Joes like invading in this scene, like even the scene where they crash through the sort of glass dome of the greenhouse, it's pretty easy, like there's a sound effect, Wacoom, and then there's a panel where they're just, I don't know, swinging down, rappelling down, parachuting down. I can't quite tell. On the bottom panel where like Scarlet's head is cropped and Snake Eyes is firing, and
both Snake Eyes and Duke are sort of holding on to something.
Yeah,
I think it's like they sort of, and on the previous page, sort of dangling down from the ceiling, there's these kind of grips. So I think they must have this sort of like rappelling thing,
okay,
where they
like
hold on to a grip,
a zip line thing that goes straight down,
something like that.
And if comparing these 10 pages to 2 whole issues of G.I. Joe, and I think some of the best issues of G.I. Joe, if that's not fair, just 3 months later, it sort of happens again in the Marvel G.I. Joe, where issue, is it 97 or 98? It's 97. 98. That's the Lee Weeks fill-in, where the cover is Stalker and Storm Shadow, and there's like an ink stamp over it, like "Wanted, Fugitives." And this is the issue where I'm getting 2 issues mixed up. The Lee Weeks issue is where the Night Creepers talk to Cobra Commander on the top floor of the Cobra Consulate building, which has taken some damage, and there's like missing windows, right? And it's at night, and there's all this mood in that scene. And Lee Weeks was right out of school then, so maybe this is a fair comparison. It doesn't have a lot of professional credits to his name. He'd drawn like 2 issues of Daredevil by that point. And then an issue or 2 later, it's Mark Bright, and that's when Snake Eyes, or is it 108? I forget. When
107 is The Fugitives, drawn by Lee Weeks, and then the following issue is 108 with Snake Eyes putting one of his knives, one of his 2 Cobra Commander's neck, right? Yep.
Seeley has a real thankless task here to pull off an action scene in not enough pages. And there are a lot of characters in this scene. This is a remarkably small squad of Joes. It's just 4 plus Flint, but there are also 3 Red Shadows and then a bunch of Red Shadows. So there's a lot to juggle in this scene, right? But I don't really get any sense of sort of where this happens. That there's an upper level where the speech was made and a lower level where the generic Red Shadows were, that there's like broken glass around, or that now that it's raining and there's a giant hole in the glass, some of the rain would be coming in. And that may or may not affect the story. I'm not looking for like someone to get wet because they're standing over there, or someone to slip because there's water on the floor. I don't mean that, but like, separate from you like recording a podcast, Mark, right now, if we were just watching you in the space where you are, you'd be behaving differently if the window was open and it was really windy. You'd be talking differently, and you'd be sort of leaning, and your hat would be. And then for Wilder Vaughn to get away in this little sort of half firebat, half escape pod feels really truncated and not silly, but not cool. It's like, oh, okay, well, I guess if he has to live, he's got to get away. But he's been so Machiavellian and vicious in the last couple of issues, and there isn't a big showdown with anyone. There's a very short showdown with Snake Eyes, and then like, oh, I guess there was a fire bat on the roof that I didn't notice. And then in 2 panels, it is established, and then it's used, and he gets away. So I still think this issue is more fun and better than the previous issue, but I'm quite aware of how in sort of some different ways. Like the previous issue was trying to cram in a lot of dialogue and a lot of explanation. And this issue is still doing that. This issue is also trying to cram in a lot of action so that it can be a satisfying resolution.
Okay, so I think that was much the end of it. The last page there is Flint. The Joe team has been disbanded once more, packing up his house and looking at a photo of himself and Lady J. The I Spy there being that it's in an animated style.
Yeah. Both in drawing, it looks like the cartoon, and in color. Although his shirt's the wrong color. Oh no, his shirt's brown. I guess it's Tiger Force Flint, who we never saw in animation. I don't think he's even in the ad for the toys.
Oh, yeah, I hadn't clocked that one. Yeah. So, and that's it. That's the end of the issue. The end of the Brandon Jerwa run on G.I. Joe. Any more thoughts, or should we give this one a score?
Well, there's a couple sort of formatting things just to mention in the issue, in the centerfold, which is that is a technical term in publishing, right? I know that has a particular connotation with Playboy, right? That's a second meaning. The centerfold is the center fold of a magazine or comic. In the center fold of this issue of G.I. Joe, they're not staples, but I'll call them staples. Where the staples are, there's a 2-page ad for the relaunch for issue 0 and for issue 1. And in big block fonts, it says, get both issues and join the fight, right? And issue 0 is only 25 cents. It's a full-length comic. It's 22 pages, right? Issue 1, and this is hyping the new writer and art team. And then I think I mentioned this in the last issue, but the final page of this comic book is an in-house ad for subscriptions that you can subscribe to a Dungeons and Dragons miniseries, and also you can subscribe to the first 6 issues of G.I. Joe America's Elite, right? Get the new series delivered monthly to your door. You only have to order once. Get issue 0 for free when you order, which is funny because issue 0 is only 25 cents. So it's not the best deal, but hey, 1 out of every 50 subscriptions will receive signed copies. And then the inside back cover is an ad for that year's G.I. Joe convention. And it mentions the new G.I. Joe #1, which is going to have some kind of convention exclusive cover. And writer Joe Casey is tentatively scheduled to appear. And then, this is fun. Do you have the back cover, right, in your bound edition, Mark?
Who is the biggest G.I. Joe fan?
Yeah, so this is a photo. That's Brandon Jerwa, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a photo. It's been made not black and white, but sort of red and white, and it must have been taken at a convention. It's Brandon Jerwa. He must be seated, and he's talking to and surrounded by 4 cosplayers. Looks like Lady J, Recondo, Scarlet, and Law. and there's a contest, and there's a photo of some other person on the bottom. I can't tell who it is, and it encourages people to email proof that they're the biggest G.I. Joe fan, right? The sky's the limit. What are you going to do? How are you going to prove it? Figure it out. And Devil's Due will announce the winner on their website, and the winner will get their name printed in an upcoming comic. And then there's a disclaimer in small type on the bottom that says only individuals can enter, no groups or clubs. And I think this is really fun. I also wish it involved some free comics, not just your name.
Oh, you
oh no, it does.
Lifetime subscription.
Okay, right. Sorry. Right, I skipped the second largest font. Prove to DDP that you are the biggest G.I. Joe comic fan and win a lifetime subscription, the only person to have one. And it is a little sad to know that whoever won this would only get it for another 2 years. I don't say that snidely. That's a bummer because, I know a guy who did a mural at a restaurant, and part of his payment was he eats there for free forever.
Right.
And it's been a couple years, so he saved some money, and the restaurant's in a good location and does good business. So I think this will keep paying dividends for a long time to come.
Is this Zombie Burger?
No. This is a little like ramen place in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Zombie Burger, folks, is a reference to a restaurant in Des Moines, Iowa, which has some Ron Wagner murals on the walls. All right, so that's now that I've pointed out the advertising stuff. I give this a 5.
Yeah, I think I'm probably there. I tend to score a little bit higher than you, so I'll give it 5.5, 6, 5.5. I think it's pretty well written. It's very clear. The art is generally good, and I think Tim Seeley's art is quite handsome. I describe it as, and I think that we've not really touched on it, but I think it has improved since he started on the book. He's got a lot more experience under his belt, and generally it does look good and generally satisfying, if not necessarily technically particularly dynamic from a perspective. Yeah, I'll also note as well that I think that Brandon Joa's writing has generally got a very good ear for dialogue. Often when I'm looking at specific speech balloons and reading the dialogue, I do sort of think to myself that it's got a nice flair to the way that the dialogue is written. So while my scoring here is not astronomical, it's working within the confines of maybe sort of the overall story, sort of not necessarily massively appealing to me, rather than entirely the execution of it.
My final two thoughts. One, we didn't talk about General Ray, and he is certainly a sort of his arc, or the reveal of his backstory is certainly a, no pun intended, casualty of this final truncation. And I was thinking about this as I read the comic, and I thought, I don't like Ray. I dislike him less, but I really don't want him taking up so much space. And I think Jerwa had A, committed to him, and B, likes him. But if I were doing this, I would have found a way to take Ray out of the story an issue or two ago, so that a Joe who I know more, maybe it's Colton, whether or not he magically can walk again. Bruce Wayne did it, right? Bruce Wayne did it after just a year. What was that? That was Night Quest: The Search. Yeah. Because, the final scene, I would be more invested if it wasn't like Ray and 4 Joes that I love, but, like Bazooka and 4 Joes that I love, or like Storm Shadow and 4 Joes that I love, or like Hawk, whatever it is. And also, and I will say this again in our next Disavowed episode, but it worked. The plan worked. I had stopped reading this book. After this issue, I came back. And not only did I buy issue 0 and issue 1, I was really excited. Really liked Joe Casey because of other stuff he was writing. Really liked Stefano Caselli's art. And I thought, we won't jettison everything that's come before, but we're not necessarily going to talk about it. And this will be a smaller squad or more focused, whatever it was. The stakes are bigger, right? Whatever the promises were. I was very excited. And also, I love stunts when publishers make a full-size comic very cheap. Batman, the 10-cent adventure, Superman, the 12-cent adventure, the 9-cent issue of Fantastic Four. And then Devil's Due does it again later on in this run, all of which are facts that I will surely repeat in our next Disavowed episode. But this is not meant to sound snide. But I was really glad when this was over because, like, okay, now we can get back to it.
In our last chat, I got slightly confused about the Joe Casey X-Men run, which I was Googling after the event. And I sort of slightly conflated Joe Casey with Joe Kelly and Mike Carey. So Mike Carey did X-Men Supernovas, which was what the run that I was thinking of, which was later than 2005. And Joe Kelly, I think, did a long run on Deadpool. So one a similar sounding Joe and another guy, an X-Men writer with a similar sounding surname.
Aren't Joe Casey and Joe Kelly both in Man of Action?
Oh, quite could. Yeah, could be.
It's them and Duncan Rouleau, and I forget who the fourth person is. I think they're together in a group. In terms of the timeline, there is a caption on the final panel of this final page of this final issue. After it says the end, it says the saga of G.I. Joe begins anew in G.I. Joe number 0, on sale in 2 weeks. So that's really cool for momentum. And it sort of brings to mind, at the moment we're recording this, we don't yet know how many months might pass after IDW's G.I. Joe 300 before some other publisher's first issue. And it'd be great if it's only 1 month, although more months might sort of whet people's appetite or give the new publisher time to, get the word out. But going back to 2005, that's great. Just 2 weeks.
Good. And it comes on hot on the heels of 2 double issues that were both cover dated, I think, May 2005. So they came out in very quick succession. That's right. That's right. Did we forget to say this? That these final 2 issues, it ran bi-weekly. It really was. Right. It really was 4 issues worth in 1 month. Wow. Yeah. So all very hot on the heels. Obviously, they wanted to get going, get this thing happening. New era. A lot of G.I. Joe comics out in May 2005.
And, if you feel like you've spent a bunch of money on G.I. Joe comics, the next one is only 25 cents.
Bargain. So, yes, I think we are done talking Devil's Due issue 43. Next time on Talking Joe Disavowed, we will continue looking at the Disavowed era. And Tim, I suggest before we move on to the Joe Casey stuff, we round out the Brandon Joa era by looking at Master and Apprentice from May 2004. Oh,
yes. Okay, I don't remember the date of Master and Apprentice 2. Will we also do that as an episode before?
Yeah. Let's do Master and Apprentice 1. I think 4 issues of that all in one go. And then we'll follow that up with Master and Apprentice 2. And while we're in Brandon Joa land, let's cover Snake Eyes Declassified. And then let's crash on into...
what about G.I. Joe Transformers Volume 2?
Oof, now you're talking. What do you think?
Oh, man, people aren't going to... Well, I forget who wrote it, but I think chronologically we should.
We talked to him. It was...
Dan Jolly?
Yes, Dan Jolly.
Okay, great. They're in a box just 10 feet from where I'm sitting, but the door is closed. So it's not like I can't... Okay. Also, there's a computer in front of me. It's not like I can't know at the moment. All right, so for those of you who were really excited to hear me in just one more episode repeat the same 5 bullet points about how excited I was that the Jurwa book was ending and the Joe Casey book was beginning, I guess I'll do that in 4 episodes time. 5 episodes time.
So, Master and Apprentice, followed by Master and Apprentice 2, followed by Snake Eyes Declassified, followed by Transformers Volume 2, then we're into issue 0. and all caught up with all of these other books that have been running in parallel. Apart from Reloaded. Oh no, Reloaded. We'll do Reloaded another time.
Oh yeah. Maybe isn't there a natural break, like 1 year into America's Elite? Maybe we swoop back around to do Reloaded then.
Yeah, when we need to reload, we'll swoop back to that.
Yes. Anyway, it's all right. That's a good pun. Good job.
It wasn't that good. Okay, so that's Disavowed. We'll also cover all of the issues of A Real American Hero from Larry Hama as they come out from the old and new publishers, just other general interesting stuff as and when it happens. Tim, where can people find you?
Video essays about television and film at Atomic Abe Productions. That's our website and our YouTube channel. My brick and mortar comic book store in Somerville, Massachusetts is Hub Comics, and the blog where I write about G.I. Joe is arealamericanbook.com.
Great stuff. You can find out all about Talking Joe on the usual places. talkingjoe.co.uk is the website that has links to those places. We have a Facebook group. We're on Twitter for the moment. As at time of recording, Twitter still exists. We're on Instagram, and you can also leave us things like voice memos. We're also on Patreon, patreon.com, Talking Joe. So a big thanks to all of our backers: Richard, Sam, Jay, Bill, Christopher, Justin, Rob, and Brian, who are getting access to episodes extra early, as well as the odd bit of exclusive content here and there.
Speaking of our voicemail facility, we've got a message in from Scotty Cameron. Let's see what he has to say.
Yo, Talking Joe. Hello, Mark, Tim. I wanted to respond to the prompt in last episode of Disavowed, A-Raw 41, about the question if the listener had started reading America's Elite as their first DDP G.I. Joe run, or if they had started A-Raw, quit, or had read to the end and then picked up America's Elite. And for me, it was the first G.I. Joe comic I ever read. I enjoyed some of the cartoons, and at the time, I liked Rise of Cobra. Anything with explosions was good in my mind at that time. And so I had read America's Elite along with the current IDW stuff in the run-up to Retaliation. I wanted to finish by asking about the Black Major. His Comic Vine entry has Wilder Vaughn listed as an alias, and in some of the paragraphs in his entry, there are sentences that refer to him as Wilder Vaughn. And I was wondering, could Wilder Vaughn in the DDP comics be the DDP interpretation of the Black Major? I was just curious. Yo, Joe.
Thanks for the voicemail, Scotty. Now, your specific question, I think, got a little bit of discussion on the Facebook forums. Everybody go over to the Facebook forums if you're not already a member. And yeah, I think, Comic Vine is a wiki page, which means that people can put in stuff there, and that maybe the quality of that information is dependent on the person putting it in. So I don't know exactly where they would have got the Wilder Vaughn Black Major connection. I'm not too sure if there has been any comic appearances where they have made that connection, or it's just the wishful thinking of the author that put it on the Comic Vine page. But certainly back in the Battle Action Force days, he was known as John Shepherd, and from the issues that we've gone through so far, there isn't really much there that connects Wilder Vaughn to the Black Major. Certainly his appearance, he looked much more like Baron Ironblood. So I think this one is probably a bit of a red herring. He's not Mars Herring either. Okay, anyway, thanks for the message.
Whew. So that is us done. But remember that
nobody beats Talking Joe, an international podcast.
Laters.
I remember Della Eden's name this time through the whole episode.